Have you ever had that quiet fear that the people closest to you already made a decision about your life and didn't bother telling you? Not in anger, not in chaos, but calmly, like it was planned. The fear found me standing in an airport terminal in Paris, holding nothing but a small carry-on bag and a growing sense that I had just been erased. My name is Jace Romero. I'm 38 years old, and until that morning, I believed family disagreements eventually cooled down. That blood always softened anger. I was wrong. We had traveled together, my parents, my younger sister, and me. The trip was supposed to heal things after my divorce. A fresh start. My mother said. I paid for most of it because I wanted peace. I wanted to prove I wasn't the difficult one that often hinted I was. The argument began quietly at the check-in counter. My father leaned close and asked me to send more money back home. Not later. Not after we returned. Right then, I said no. I explained that I was rebuilding my savings. That divorce had already taken enough from me. I kept my voice calm, respectful. Their expressions changed instantly. My mother sighed loudly, like she was tired of me. My sister shook her head, muttering something about how I had changed. My father's tone hardened. Earlier that day, my sister had borrowed my phone for photos. My mother had my passport, just to keep all documents together, she said. I trusted them without a second thought. When they collected their boarding passes, I reached for mine. It wasn't their at first. I laughed nervously. I thought it was a mistake. I checked my bag again. Then again, they started walking towards security. Wait, I said, following them. I don't have my ticket. My father turned around slowly. His face was calm. To calm, you'll figure something out, he said. You're an adult. My mother didn't look back. My sister avoided my eyes. Then they walked through the gate. It took a few seconds for my body to catch up with what my mind already knew. My ticket had been canceled. My phone was gone. My passport wasn't in my hands. I rushed to the airline desk, explaining everything at once. My voice shook. My chest felt tight. The agent looked sympathetic but firm. Policies were policies. Security stepped closer. That's when I noticed him. A man standing nearby in a perfectly pressed suit. He wasn't staring. He was observing, like he had seen this kind of thing before. He walked up beside me and whispered, "Pretend you're my wife. My driver is pulling up." I froze. Then he added, quietly, "Trust me, they'll regret this." I didn't know why I believed him, but I took his arm. As we walked away from the terminal, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just abandonment. It felt intentional. And as the airport door slid shut behind me, one terrifying thought settled in my chest. If my family could leave me like this, what were they really trying to take from me? Have you ever trusted a complete stranger more than your own family? Not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice? That thought kept looping in my mind as the car door shut and the airport vanished behind tinted glass. The vehicle was quiet, unnaturally quiet. No radio, no polite conversation, just the soft hum of the engine and the faint scent of leather. I sat rigid, clutching my carry-on so tightly my fingers ached, like if I let go, I might disappear with it. The man beside me didn't rush to explain anything. He waited until we merged into traffic, the lights of Paris smearing across the window like memories I wasn't allowed to keep. "I'm Alexander Hayes," he said finally. His voice was calm, practiced. "I'm American, from New York." I swallowed. "Joyce," he glanced at me, not with interest, not with pity, but with evaluation. "You handled that situation better than most people would," he said. A short laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I was shaking. "Yes," he replied evenly. "But you were thinking. Most people panic. You calculated." My hands trembled harder at that. I tucked them beneath my bag so he wouldn't see. He leaned back, giving me space. "I saw your family leave," he continued. "I saw you try to negotiate instead of breaking down." I closed my eyes for half a second. I could still picture my mother's expression. Calm, resolved, as if what she was doing had already been decided long before that moment. "That told me something," Alexander said. "What?" I asked quietly. that you don't fall apart when you're cornered. The words settled into me heavier than I expected. The car turned onto a secluded road, away from the main terminal. That's when he explained why he'd intervened. In 2 weeks, he was hosting a charity gala in New York, not for goodwill, but for survival. Investors, board members, people who measured stability by appearances, they expect me to look settled, he said, grounded, not alone. His wife had died 2 years earlier. At first, there had been sympathy, then whispers, then doubt. His younger brother had started using that doubt, suggesting grief had weakened his judgment, hinting that leadership should be reconsidered. A married man looks anchored, Alexander said flatly. A widower looks exposed. I stared out the window as the meaning caught up with me. And you want me to pretend to be your wife? I said, yes. I turned to him. Why me? You could hire someone trained for this. I don't need an actress. He replied, I need someone real. Someone who knows what it's like to be abandoned and still stand upright. The car slowed near a private terminal. Outside, a sleek jet waited, engines humming softly. He turned to face me. I'm offering you a flight to New York tonight. Secure housing, compensation, and legal shielding. That last word made my breath hitch. I thought of the documents my father had insisted I sign, the way my family had rushed through security. To prepare. Before agreeing, I asked the only question that mattered. What happens if this destroys what's left of my life? Alexander didn't pause. Then I carry the consequences. I won't let you take the fall for something I asked you to do. There was no charm in his voice, no persuasion, just certainty. For the first time since the airport, fear loosened its grip, not relief. Control. I extended my hand. One condition, I said, my identity stays protected. No interviews, no headlines. I don't become a story. He nodded. Agreed. We shook hands as the car stopped beside the jet. Inside, exhaustion finally overtook me. As the plane lifted off the runway, the city disappeared beneath the clouds. I wasn't being rescued. I was choosing a different kind of danger. And as the seatbelt light flickered on, one thought struck harder than any fear. If my family was this calm letting me go, what paperwork had they already completed before the plane ever left the ground? Have you ever felt safe for just a moment, only to realize that safety was borrowed time? That was how New York felt when I woke up. The room was quiet, bathed in pale morning light. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I didn't think. I almost believed the nightmare was over. Then Paris came back all at once. The airport counter, the missing ticket, my parents walking away without turning back. The phone on the nightstand caught my eye. Alexander had placed it there before leaving for his office, fully charged and locked. No instructions. Just trust. It felt heavier than it should have. There was only one person I could call. My cousin Diane. She answered on the second ring. Joyce. Oh, thank God. Where are you? I'm safe, I said quickly. I'm in New York. Her relief lasted barely a second. Then her voice hardened. Your parents are telling everyone you've lost control. My stomach dropped. Lost control how? They're saying you had a breakdown at the airport, she said. That the divorce finally broke you. That you were confused, accusing them of things that didn't make sense. And then you disappeared. I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the bed. That's not what happened, I whispered. I know, Diane said softly. But Joyce, they're repeating it like it's fact. There was a pause. Then she added, they've already spoken to a lawyer. My heart began to pound. About what? She hesitated. About protecting you. The words sent a chill through my body. They're talking about conservatorship, she continued. They're saying you're not mentally fit to manage your finances right now. The room felt smaller, like the walls had moved closer. And they keep mentioning the condo, Diane added. The one your grandparents left you. They say it's too valuable to be left in the hands of someone unstable. Something inside me went cold. The missing phone, the canceled ticket, the calm way they walked away. Paris wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. They needed a story, I said slowly. If I vanished, they could say I was confused. If no one could reach me, they could claim concern. Diane didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, Joyce, I think that's exactly what they're doing. Seconds later, screenshots appear on my phone, draft emails, notes, a timeline. My parents weren't panicking. They were planning. I wasn't spiraling. I was being framed. When the call ended, my hands were shaking, but my thoughts were clearer than they had been since the airport. This wasn't about love or worry. This was about control. And if they succeeded, I wouldn't just lose my condo. I would lose the right to make decisions about my own life. I walked to the window and looked down at the city below. Thousands of people moving freely, unaware that my future was being quietly boxed in, paperwork by paperwork. I found Alexander in his office minutes later. They're coming after me legally, I said. They used Paris to build a case. They're already moving. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. That means they've already started the clock. My throat tightened. The clock. They didn't strand you, he said. They removed you from the narrative. That's how you rewrite someone's life without them realizing it. The words settled heavy in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't just scared. I was angry, because now I understood something terrifying. My family hadn't just abandoned me. They had started a countdown, and I had no idea what would happen when it reached 0. Have you ever realized that staying quiet might cost you everything? Not someday, but sooner than you expect? That was the thought pressing against my chest after I told Alexander what my cousin had uncovered. I waited for comfort, for reassurance, for him to tell me it would all be okay. Instead, he went very still, not shocked, not confused. Alert. His posture shifted slightly, the way it does when someone stops reacting and starts calculating. They're not acting out of fear, he said after a moment. They're acting with intent. The words echoed in my head longer than they should have. Within minutes, Alexander was on the phone with his attorney. I sat across from him, listening as pieces of my life were reduced to unfamiliar language. Capacity, petition, asset control, words I had always believed belonged to extreme cases, not quiet family conversations. Not to me. By the afternoon, his lawyer arrived, Martin Coleman, sharp suit, focused eyes, movements so precise they felt rehearsed. He didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt. He listened as I explained everything. The airport in Paris, the missing phone, the canceled ticket, the call from Diane. When I finished, he folded his hands and spoke calmly. They're laying groundwork, he said. But groundwork isn't evidence. Relief rose in my chest and died just as quickly. However, he continued, groundwork becomes dangerous if it goes unanswered, especially if they fall first. My heart tightened. He explained the strategy carefully. We wouldn't wait for accusations. We would move now, establish competence, financial stability, medical clarity, professional consistency. If they control the narrative, he said, they control the pace. For the first time since Paris, no one was asking how I felt. They were asking me to prove how I lived. I gathered everything. Tax records showing steady income, contracts from previous work, performance reviews, bank statements, emails where I'd handled pressure calmly. Proof that the unstable version of me they were describing didn't exist. Each document felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Still, doubt crept in. What if it wasn't enough? What if the story they were telling sounded more believable than the truth? One evening, as we sat surrounded by paperwork, Alexander broke the silence. My brother is doing something similar, he said quietly. After my wife died, he started questioning my judgment. One bad investment, and suddenly grief became incapacity. I looked at him differently then. This wasn't rare. It was a pattern. Late nights became routine. Papers spread across the dining table, coffee forgotten and cold, the city glowing beyond the windows while we worked in silence. And somewhere in those hours, I noticed something unsettling. I wasn't unraveling. I was focused. I asked questions. I challenged assumptions. I organized timelines and flagged inconsistencies in my parents' narrative. At one point, Martin stopped speaking and started taking notes while I talked. The realization shook me. They had spent years convincing me I was too emotional, too reactive, too fragile to manage my own life. Yet here I was, steady, deliberate, clear-headed. Capable. Martin didn't soften the truth. If they file before we do, he said, a court could temporarily restrict you while they investigate. Access to accounts, decision-making authority, even travel. How long? I asked. Long enough to change everything? That was the moment fear truly settled in. Not panic. Certainty. That's why we act now, he added, before the paperwork becomes permission. Later that night, Alexander leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. If you hadn't met me at that airport, he said, they might already be ahead of us. I finished the thought quietly. They might already be in control. The truth of it pressed down on me. This wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting my identity. Well, I wasn't there to stop it. And as I closed the final folder of documents, one thing became painfully clear. If I didn't fight back now, silence wouldn't just cost me my assets. It would cost me my voice, my choices, and the right to decide my own life. Have you ever surprised yourself by realizing you were stronger than everyone told you? That realization didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no confrontation, no victory speech. It came quietly. In the middle of a planning meeting I was never meant to lead. The charity gala preparations were supposed to be simple. Alexander had brought me along as his wife, a presence, not a participant. I was expected to smile, listen, and stay out of the way while others handled the decisions. That had always been my role. But problems have a way of revealing themselves to people who've spent years managing chaos. As the event coordinator walked through the schedule, I noticed issues immediately. Overlapping time slots, speakers booked too closely together, a live auction scheduled after dinner. The worst possible timing if you wanted energy in the room. I hesitated before speaking. Old habits die hard. If the keynote runs late, I said carefully, everything after it will collapse. The room went quiet. The coordinator looked back at her notes, then nodded slowly. You're right, we'd lose the room. That was the first crack. From there, I couldn't stop seeing gaps, seating arrangements that would place business rivals side by side, lighting plans that would dull the atmosphere before speeches even began, vendor contracts with vague penalty clauses that invited last-minute chaos. When I pointed them out, no one dismissed me. When I fixed them, people listened. By the second meeting, Alexander stopped introducing me as my wife. He said, Joyce is handling logistics. Something shifted inside me when I heard my name spoken that way. Not as an attachment, but as authority. I took over communication with vendors, renegotiated timelines, smoothed egos when schedules changed. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply doing what came naturally. One afternoon, a sponsor emailed concerns about Alexander's recent leadership. The message was polite, careful, but threaded with doubt. Rumors quietly circulating. Alexander handed me the email without saying a word. Reading it, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the reflex to second-guess myself, to shrink. But this time, I didn't. I drafted a response that was calm, factual, and precise. It acknowledged concerns without feeding them, redirected focus to performance, results, and upcoming projections. No defensiveness, no apology. When the sponsor replied with renewed commitment, the room fell silent. Alexander looked at me differently then. So this is what they overlooked, he said quietly later that night. They didn't overlook it, I replied. They ignored it. Late nights of planning turned into conversations. He shared how his brother circled every mistake, using grief as proof of instability. I shared how my family framed concern as care, and care as control. The patterns were painfully similar. The more capable I became, the clearer something else emerged. Competence threatens people who benefit from your doubt. My parents hadn't labeled me fragile by accident. It was convenient, because someone who believes they're unstable doesn't resist being managed. One evening, while trying on the dress chosen for the gala, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me stood straighter. Her eyes were focused, not apologetic. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who I was before they convinced me otherwise. And as the final preparations locked into place, a quiet certainty settled in me. The more visible my strength became, the more desperate my family's next move would be.
Have you ever felt the air change, not because something happened, but because you knew something was about to? Not just inconvenience. Not embarrassment. Something that could quietly take your independence if you weren't paying attention. That was the feeling that followed me in the days after the gala planning meetings. Nothing had gone wrong. In fact, everything was moving smoothly. Too smoothly. That's how I knew it wouldn't last. The gala itself was a success. Donations exceeded expectations. Sponsors were pleased. Alexander's leadership, quietly questioned weeks earlier, was now being praised in careful, professional emails. And me? I was visible. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But unmistakably. People asked for my opinion. Deferred to my judgment. Thanked me, publicly. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt watched. The first sign came 2 mornings later. An envelope slid under Alexander's office door, cream-colored, thick, heavier than it needed to be. No return address. My name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a formal letter. Not from my parents, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands were steady as I read it. That surprised me. The language was polite. Almost compassionate. It expressed concern for my well-being. Referenced recent instability, emotional strain, and reports from close family members. Then came the sentence that made my stomach drop. A petition is being prepared to assess your capacity to manage personal and financial affairs. Not filed. Prepared. Yet. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the desk. Alexander read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. They've moved, he said quietly. But they're testing first. Testing. To see if I would freeze. To see if I would reach out. To see if fear would do their work for them. Martin arrived within the hour. This is intentional, he said after reading the letter. They want a reaction. Something emotional. Something they can document. So what do we do? I asked. We don't give them one, he replied. We respond, but on our terms. That afternoon, we sent a brief acknowledgement. No denial. No explanation. Just a request that all communication go through counsel. Professional. Controlled. It went against every instinct I'd been raised with, to explain, to soften, to reassure. Silence had once made me vulnerable. Now, it was strategy. The next move came faster than I expected. Diane called that night, her voice low. They've been asking about you. Telling people you're overwhelmed. That you're being managed by your husband. The word hit harder than I expected. Managed. I had spent years proving I could think, decide, and stand on my own, and with a single word, they were trying to take that away. They're careful, Diane continued. They're not attacking you directly. They're questioning him. Of course they were. If they couldn't discredit me, they'd weaken the ground beneath me. They're saying you're being influenced, she added. That you're not thinking clearly on your own. By the end of the week, the consequences began to show. A committee role I'd helped build was quietly reassigned. A speaking invitation was postponed indefinitely. A board member requested a check-in call that felt more like an evaluation than a conversation. None of it was loud. All of it was deliberate. One evening, Martin laid everything out plainly. They're building a file, he said. Not to win immediately, but to make you doubt yourself long enough for the process to take over. I thought of the woman I used to be. The one who apologized for existing. The one who mistook control for concern. She would have folded. I didn't. Because now I understood something they hadn't counted on. I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. And somewhere, I knew they had just realized they were running out of time.
Have you ever agreed to something that would change your entire life? Not because it felt right, but because it was the only way to stay in control. That was the space I was standing in when Alexander and I finally sat down to talk terms. There were no candles, no sentiment, no pretending this was anything other than what it was, a calculation. We sat across from each other at the dining table, legal pads laid out neatly between us. The city glowed behind the glass, distant, indifferent. This wasn't a proposal. It was a negotiation between two people who knew what it meant to lose leverage. 1 year, I said first, my voice steady even as my pulse climbed. No extensions without mutual agreement. Agreed. Alexander replied instantly. Full financial separation. I continued. No shared debt. No liabilities tied to my name. Documented, he said. Sealed. I paused longer before the next condition. Long enough for him to notice. I control my public image, I said. No interviews. No personal history used as strategy. Ever. He studied me for a moment, not resisting, but weighing. Your story stays yours, he said finally. I won't touch it. With every line we wrote, something strange happened. My fear didn't vanish. It organized itself. This wasn't surrender. This was structure. We discussed compensation, housing, legal protections. Not just for me, but for what I already owned. My condo, my accounts, my future. An exit clause. Immediate, clean. Still, when Martin slid the final agreement across the table, my chest tightened. Not from doubt. From the realization that once I signed, there was no pretending this was temporary in my mind. I signed anyway. The civil ceremony took place quietly at City Hall days later. No guests. No photographs meant for albums, just witnesses, paperwork, and the sharp sound of a stamp sealing something permanent. When I signed my new name, my hand didn't shake. But my stomach dropped. Marriage, I realized, wasn't always about love. Sometimes it was armor you wore into a war no one else could see. The shift was immediate. Public records surfaced. Articles softened. Whispers stopped mid-sentence. The narrative changed. From instability to reinvention, Alexander's board relaxed. And just like that, my family noticed. The first message came from my mother, concern wrapped in gentleness, asking if I was safe. The second came from my father, short, sharp, demanding a meeting. Then came silence, the kind that isn't calm, just calculated. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to explain myself to people who had already decided what I was worth. Alexander noticed the pattern. They're panicking, he said one evening, reading over my shoulder. People do that when access disappears. He was right, because when people lose control over you, they don't get quieter, they get desperate. Late that night, standing by the window, I realized how unfamiliar peace felt. Being protected not by blood, but by boundaries. I used to believe marriage made you smaller, that it required you to fold yourself into someone else's life. This one, DID in single quotas. It gave me space. But space is dangerous when someone is used to owning your decisions. And as the messages from my family returned, sharper, more urgent, less polite, one truth became impossible to ignore. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of what I could no longer be forced to give them. Have you ever noticed how concern quietly turns into command the moment it stops working? That truth hit me the second Elena knocked on the study door. Your parents are here, she said carefully, and your sister. I didn't feel fear. I felt confirmation. They wouldn't have crossed an ocean unless they believed something was still theirs to claim. Alexander stood immediately. Do you want me there? I hesitated, just a second longer than I meant to. Then I shook my head. Not yet. If I don't face this now, it'll follow me forever. When I stepped into the living room, the air felt dense, the kind that presses against your lungs before a storm breaks. My father stood by the window, posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back like a man inspecting property. My mother sat perfectly upright on the couch, expression composed, rehearsed. My sister lingered near the doorway, arms folded tightly, eyes darting like she was already looking for an exit. No hugs, no relief. My father spoke first. You've gone too far, Joyce. I stayed standing, marrying a man you barely know, he continued, hiding behind lawyers instead of coming home. This isn't normal. My mother leaned forward, voice smooth. We're worried about your mental state. Ever since the divorce, you've been unstable. The word landed exactly where they intended. For a moment, my vision blurred, not from tears, but from the familiar pressure to explain myself. I forced it back. Concern, I said slowly, doesn't look like canceling someone's return ticket and taking their phone. My father's jaw tightened. You disappeared in Paris. No, I replied evenly. You made sure I couldn't contact anyone. Then you told people I'd had a breakdown. My sister shifted. We didn't think it would go this far. I turned to her. Then why didn't you stop it? She opened her mouth, closed it. Her silence answered me louder than words stopped. My mother stood. This marriage isn't healthy. That man is manipulating you. We're here to bring you home. Before this becomes permanent. Something steady settled in my chest. Not anger, resolve. No, I said calmly. You're here because you lost control. My father stepped closer, voice sharpening. We raised you. We know what's best for you. You raised me to trust you, I said. And you used that trust to trap me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father said the sentence that changed everything. We were protecting the family assets. The room went still. Not me. Not my safety. The assets. The condo, I said quietly. That's what this is really about. My mother didn't deny it. It's too valuable to be managed by someone making emotional decisions. A laugh almost escaped me. Sharp, disbelieving, I gestured toward the hallway. My lawyer is here. Martin stepped in, briefcase in hand. The shift was immediate. Confidence faltered. My father's shoulders stiffened. My mother's composure cracked. Just slightly. Martin laid the documents out carefully. The petition, the inconsistencies, the absence of medical evidence, the consequences if they proceeded. My mother's face drained of color. My sister finally spoke, her voice shaking. Dad said this was the only way to make you listen. I looked at her, and for the first time, my voice softened. Leaving me alone in a foreign airport was supposed to help. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't answer. Martin slid one final document forward. Withdraw the petition immediately. Issue a public correction. In return, Joyce will not pursue civil action. My father scoffed. You wouldn't sue your own parents? I met his gaze. Steady, unblinking. Try me. They didn't apologize. They didn't argue. They left. But as the door closed behind them, I felt it. Not relief. Warning. Because people who lose control quietly don't always accept it quietly. The silence afterward felt heavy, but clean, and standing there, I finally understood the truth I'd avoided for years. They didn't come to fix things. They came to see if I would still bend, and this time, I didn't. But as I watched their car disappear down the drive, one thought settled cold in my mind. People who fail once rarely stop trying. Have you ever waited for a decision that could erase your entire life, knowing that once it was spoken out loud, there would be no appeal strong enough to undo it? That was the space I was trapped in as I sat inside the courtroom days later, hands folded tightly in my lap, listening as strangers debated whether I was capable of controlling my own existence. The room was quiet, not peaceful. Quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your thoughts become too loud. I could hear my own breathing, slow, careful, measured. Like if I breathed too deeply, something might unravel across the aisle. My parents sat perfectly still. My father's back was straight, his expression neutral, as if this were a business meeting. My mother sat with her hands folded neatly, eyes forward, composed, the same posture she wore whenever she believed she was doing the right thing, regardless of the damage. My sister sat beside them, her eyes never lifted from the floor. That hurt more than I expected. The judge entered, files in hand, already familiar with the case. The way she flipped through the papers, efficient and curious, told me something immediately. This wasn't a dramatic emergency. It was a test. Martin stood when instructed, his voice calm, steady, to calm. I worried. He didn't plead. He didn't argue emotion. He walked the court through facts. My employment history, my financial records, years of consistent income, no debt, no missed payments, no reckless behavior. As he spoke, I felt something tighten in my chest because I realized what was really on trial wasn't my finances. It was my credibility. Then he addressed my mental health. Independent evaluations, multiple physicians, clear conclusions. No diagnosis, no impairment, no medical basis for incapacity. Still, I didn't relax, because I know how easily narratives could be twisted. Then Martin moved to Paris. The cancelled ticket, the missing phone, the hours I was unreachable. He didn't accuse anyone. He asked questions. Why was the return ticket cancelled without my consent? Why was my phone taken for safekeeping? Why were concerns raised only after I could no longer speak for myself? The air in the room shifted. I felt it before I saw it. The judge looked up. When my parents' attorney stood, his confidence was thinner than before. He leaned on fragments, emails sent during my divorce, messages written late at night, moments of stress reframed as instability. I felt my stomach drop. Because grief can be made to look dangerous if someone wants it to. Then the judge interrupted him. One question, calm, direct, unavoidable. Where is the medical evidence establishing incapacity? Silence, the kind that stretches long enough to feel deliberate. The attorney glanced at my parents. They didn't look back. There is none, Your Honor. He finally admitted. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid it would echo. The judge removed her glasses. The court finds no legal basis for conservatorship, she said. There is insufficient evidence to support claims of incapacity. She paused, just long enough for the words to sink in. This petition appears motivated by concern over property management, not personal welfare. I felt my breath catch, sharp and sudden, like I'd been underwater longer than I realized. Dismissed. Just like that. No grand speech, no punishment, but something far more permanent. My parents didn't move. My mother's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, or object, or explain. She didn't. My father's jaw tightened, once, briefly, controlled. The judge issued a warning about misuse of the system, then closed the case. As we stood to leave, my legs felt weak, not from relief, but from the realization of how close I had come to losing everything without ever being accused of doing something wrong. In the hallway, voices murmured softly. My parents walked past me without a word. My sister slowed. She turned, hesitation written all over her face. For a moment, I thought she might finally say something, apologize, explain, defend me. Instead, she whispered, I didn't think it would go this far. I met her eyes. That's what everyone says afterward. She looked away and followed them. I didn't chase her. That surprised me most of all. That evening, alone in the living room, the city glowing beyond the windows, I finally let myself sit with what had happened. I wasn't victorious. I was exhausted. They no longer had legal power over me. They no longer controlled my assets. They no longer controlled the story told on paper. But court rulings don't repair trust. They only draw boundaries. And as I stared out at the skyline, another thought settled in, colder than relief, heavier than anger. Winning didn't mean they were finished. It only meant they would have to find another way. Because when people lose control quietly, they don't always stop trying. And this time, I would have to be ready for what came next. Have you ever noticed how the quiet after a long battle can feel heavier than the fight itself? That was how life felt after the court decision. Not victorious, not relieved. Just quiet. There were no celebrations, no apologies waiting on my doorstep, no sudden understanding from people who had already made up their minds about me. What remained was space, wide, unfamiliar space, where pressure and expectation had lived for most of my life. For the first time in years, no one was calling to question my decisions. No one was reminding me who I was supposed to be. The conservatorship case faded from conversations and headlines, but its shadow lingered in quieter ways. People who once offered advice now avoided eye contact. Friends who had quietly believed my parents' version of events stopped reaching out altogether. I didn't chase them. Peace doesn't beg to be understood. The marriage to Alexander ended exactly as we had agreed it would. Clean, respectful, without bitterness. We sat across from each other one last time, signed the final papers, and exchanged a simple nod. No promises, no nostalgia. You did more than survive, he said quietly as we stood. You rebuilt yourself. I believed him. Not because I needed his approval, but because I could finally see it for myself. With the legal threats behind me, I turned towards something that had been waiting patiently all along, my own capability. The confidence I'd rediscovered during the gala hadn't vanished when the crisis ended. It stayed steady, persistent, asking to be used. I started small, quiet consulting, private events, nonprofits that needed or more than attention. I let my work speak instead of my story. And slowly, word spread, not loudly, not dramatically. Reliably. Within months, my calendar filled, not with obligation, but with choice. The condo my grandparents had left me stopped feeling like a battleground. The lower floor became a workspace, open light, neutral colors, calm energy. Upstairs remained my home, simple, uncluttered, finally mine. Every decision felt intentional. No permission required. One evening, an email arrived from my sister. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." She wrote about guilt, about silence, about realizing too late that compliance had made her complicit. I read it twice, slowly. Then I closed it without replying. Forgiveness doesn't always mean access. Sometimes it just means letting go of the need for resolution. My parents never reached out again. Their absence felt strange at first, like missing a limb you'd spent years protecting. But over time, I understood something important. Distance isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's protection. Months later, I stood at a waterfront venue overseeing the largest event my firm had handled yet. Everything flowed smoothly. Guests laughed. Music drifted across the water. No chaos. No correction needed. I stepped outside for a moment, letting the evening air settle around me. The lights reflected across the water in long, steady lines, uninterrupted, and standing there, I finally allowed myself to mourn. Not the family I lost, but the family I thought I had. Because family trust doesn't always break with shouting. Sometimes it dissolves quietly, through control disguised as care, through love that comes with conditions. I used to believe walking away meant failure, that distance meant abandonment. Now I know better. I didn't lose my family that day in Paris. I lost the illusion that love must come with control. And in letting that illusion go, I gained something far stronger than approval. I gained choice. I gained dignity. I gained peace. So if you're standing at a crossroads, torn between loyalty and survival, remember this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder, explain longer, or wait patiently for people to change. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting for those who already chose to leave and start building a life they can no longer reach. That isn't bitterness, that's freedom. And this time, I chose it.